What's up, Sinister Souls? Welcome to Top 5, where I take a horror franchise and rank the best it has to offer. We're going to kick this series off with Friday the 13th. I primarily rank these movies based on the strength of the final girl and surrounding characters, portrayal of Jason, their kills, and its overall entertainment value. Let's jump right into it. Coming in at number 5 is Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. Either you love this one or you hate it. Outside of Tommy's hallucinations and dreams, Jason isn't in the movie. The killer is a copycat seeking vengeance for the death of his son, and some of the kills were toned down to please the ratings board, but I enjoy it. It has a similar atmosphere to the final chapter, just a bit sleazier, and despite being toned down, you still have a few standout kills, like when Eddie is strapped to a tree with a belt and gets his eyes squeezed. I give it bonus points too for trying something different. It's set at a halfway house instead of a campground, so the characters are unique. Tommy himself is continuing to develop. He's older, stronger, and more badass in this movie. He's also dealing with stress from the events in Part 4. I do wish he had been more of an active participant in the third act fight. He doesn't really dive into the heat of the battle like he does in the final chapter, Jason Lives. As for the final girl, in this one it's Pam Roberts. She's an assistant at the halfway house. I like her. She's one of the better final girls in the series, but I think she's underutilized. She spends the last third of the movie pretty much babysitting Reggie, and during the first half of the final fight, she mostly runs around screaming and hiding. That's not what I expected her character to do at all. In the rest of this film, she comes off as a confident, natural leader, but she does redeem herself and act more in line with her character when she whips out a chainsaw and saves Reggie from getting killed. Part 5 is also one of the funniest entries in the series. Demon and his girlfriend serenade each other while he's taking a crap in an outhouse. There's Ethel the foul-mouthed redneck and her son Junior, who is the literal definition of a dumbass. They are hilarious. They steal every scene they are in. And as silly as it sounds, the murder spree in this movie basically begins because a guy wanted to share his chocolate bar. Number 4, Friday the 13th Part 3. I like Part 3 a lot. I think it's almost flawless. The opening scene at the general store drags a bit, and I'm not too crazy about the biker gang either. Instead of adding them, the writers should have added 3 other people to the friend group. Other than those minor setbacks, this is a pretty good Friday the 13th movie. It's the one where Jason gets his iconic hockey mask, you've got standout kills, he squeezes Rick's head until his eyes pop out, he cuts Andy in half while doing a handstand, and Jason as a character is at an interesting crossroads. In Part 2, he's a human, he's a backwoods psycho. In Part 4, he's a ruthless killing machine, a monster. In this one, he lands somewhere in the middle. The ruthless monster is beginning to form, but he still has traces of humanity within him. We actually hear him groan a few times when he fights the final girl. The final girl in this one is Chris Higgins, one of my favorite characters in this series. She has a great backstory. Jason attacked her in the woods years ago and she stayed away from Crystal Lake ever since. Now she's returning to the area to face her fears. This adds a bit more weight to her third act confrontation with Jason, which is quite a thrill ride. And she's surrounded by a likable group of friends too. Andy and Debbie are the down-to-earth athletic couple. Chili and Chuck are hippie stoners. Rick has a preppy lumberjack thing going on. Shelly is an insecure actor. And Vera is the serious one. If it weren't for those 2 minor flaws, it would probably be my second or third favorite in this series. At number 3, we have Friday the 13th Part 2. Part 2 is essentially an upgrade of the first movie. It does everything right the original didn't. The pacing is better, the kills are better, the characters are better. Jeff and Sandra are my favorite. We spend so much time with them, they are low-key secondary protagonists. Paul is a stoic leader. Jenny is the first compelling final girl in this series. She's a bit of a tomboy, smart. She's also one of the few characters to get inside Jason's head during the final act. Speaking of Jason, this is the first movie where he's the killer. I've also always liked his unique country bumpkin look in Part 2. He wears a potato sack over his head and dirty overalls. This movie also expands the mythology of Jason. Characters tell stories about him around the campfire, we learn why he's killing, we see that he lives in the woods in a makeshift shack. Inside, he's built a shrine to his dead mother that contains her severed head. Part 2 is a subtly creepy entry. Sitting at the number 2 spot is Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. This is another one that gets bonus points for trying something different. Jason takes on Tina Shepard, a girl with telekinesis. Surprisingly, this movie pulls off the premise well. The fight between Tina and Jason isn't as corny as you would expect it to be. She electrocutes him, hangs him, and sets him on fire. And out of all the final girls on this list, Tina has the most depth. She has a well-developed backstory involving the death of her father. She has a tense relationship with her douchebag psychiatrist, and she's trying hard to fit in with the other kids. Most of the other teenagers are decent. Not necessarily the best in the series, but they're likable. Alongside Nick, Tina's love interest, Melissa is the standout among them. She's a spoiled rich girl, narcissistic and mean. She plays the role perfectly, and has one of the best deaths in the movie. New Blood has my favorite Jason Voorhees look too. His mask is chipped and broken, his clothes are wet and torn, you can see his spine and ribcage, a broken chain hangs around his neck. The only downside is some of the kills were edited down to please the ratings board. Even then, they still aren't terrible. Jason crushes a guy's head with his bare hands, and he whips out a buzzsaw to take out Dr. Cruz. I love this one. Coming in at number 1 is Friday the 13th Part 4, The Final Chapter. This shouldn't really be a surprise. A lot of fans and critics rank this one as their favorite. Next to Part 5, it has the most Friday the 13th aura about it. It has a bit of a sleazy grindhouse vibe, and Part 4 is just a very well made slasher with a decent story. It serves as the culminating chapter in the trilogy that began with Part 2. It picks up right where Part 3 left off. We're introduced to Rob Dyer, who was Sandra's brother. He's been on the hunt for Jason ever since his sister was killed. The teenagers are great, by far the best in the series. They are a genuine group of friends. Ted and Jim are the standouts, pretty funny duo. The Jarvis family is the typical all-American family everyone can relate to. Trish is one of the best final girls in the franchise. She's bold and willing to sacrifice herself to save her brother. Jason himself is on a warpath. He has brutal kills in this movie. Axel gets his throat slit and head twisted around. Jimbo gets a corkscrew in the hand and a cleaver to the face. Doug's head is crushed against the shower wall. It's one of my favorite horror films of all time. I place it right up there with the first Elm Street movie, John Carpenter's The Thing, and a couple others. The final chapter is a certified classic. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe. Check out my social media channels and my blog at sinistersoulsentertainment.com as well, where you can find tons of horror movie reviews. You can find the links for those in the description below. Thank you for watching Top 5.